The roar of the water was so loud it swallowed the sirens. Headlights bobbed like drowning fireflies in the black, churning flood under the overpass. Ethan Miles stood on the concrete barrier with a coil of rope around his shoulders, rain drilling into his face like gravel. 20 feet away, a minivan was pinned sideways against the guardrail, water already up to the windows. A little hand slapped frantically at the inside of the glass. He could see a boy's face in the strobing flash of a distant cruiser, mouth open in a scream he couldn't hear. The asphalt trembled under his boots as another wave of muddy water slammed into the line of trapped cars. Someone behind him yelled, "The guardrail's gonna go! We have to wait for the rescue team." Ethan's fingers were already tying the knot muscle memory older than the last 10 years of his life. He looped the rope around his chest, braced once against the wind, and looked down at the boiling black river that had once been Route 14. "That kid doesn't have 10 minutes, he said mostly to himself. Then he stepped off the barrier and disappeared into the flood. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. The story really starts far from that overpass, in a place most people never look twice at, a 24-hour truck stop off I-44, 15 miles outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. Ethan Miles was 37 years old. Night shift clerk, mop wrangler, coffee brewer, unofficial mechanic, and listener to every lost soul on that stretch of highway. He wore the same navy polo with the faded Red Rock Travel Plaza logo, the same beat-up ball cap, the same quiet half-smile that told customers he'd ring them up but wouldn't pry. By 2 in the morning, the place belonged to truckers, insomniac travelers, and Ethan. He stocked shelves, fixed the ice machine when it rattled wrong, and wiped down tables in the tiny diner that shared the building. He knew which regulars tipped in crumpled ones and which ones just needed someone to ask, "You making good time tonight?" What nobody knew, what he made sure nobody knew, was that before he was the guy scanning beef jerky and lotto tickets, he'd worn a very different uniform. Ethan had spent a decade in the U.S. Coast Guard as a rescue swimmer. Cold Atlantic nights, helicopters hovering over black water. People pulled out of storms by a cable and a pair of strong arms. And one night, he hadn't been fast enough. A fishing charter had gone bad in a freak squall. He'd gone in after them, heart-pounding brain locked into training. He got 3 men to the basket. The 4th slipped out of his grasp in a wave he never saw coming. They recovered the body 3 days later. The official report said extreme conditions. Ethan's memory said something else. You didn't hold on tight enough. He left the service not long after. Took the first steady job he could find back home in Oklahoma. A small apartment, a used pickup, and weekend custody of his 10-year-old daughter Lily, who thought the world of the man who showed up every other Friday with pancakes and bad jokes. He never told her about the man he hadn't saved. He just made sure to always be early when it came to picking her up. Most days that quiet rhythm was enough. He clocked in at 10 p.m., brewed a fresh pot of coffee, traded small talk with the day manager, and slid into his place behind the counter like a ghost returning to its haunt. He listened to the local weather on the little radio by the cigarettes, more out of habit than anything else. Old habits die hard when your past life depended on watching the sky. On the night everything changed, the sky over eastern Oklahoma turned a sickly green before midnight. The radio crackled with a severe thunderstorm warning, then a flash flood advisory. Truckers joked about another Midwest soaker as they topped off their tanks. Ethan watched the radar map on his phone, heavy red and purple blobs marching straight toward Maple Creek, where the interstate dipped low under an old concrete overpass. Around 12:40 a.m., as rain began to hammer the roof so hard it shook the fluorescent lights, the scanner on the counter picked up a frantic voice from County Dispatch. Multiple vehicles stalled under the Maple Creek overpass. Water rising fast. Possible entrapment, unknown number of occupants. Ethan's hand tightened around his coffee cup. He knew that stretch of road. He knew how fast Maple Creek could jump its banks when the sky opened up. And before he could talk himself out of it, he was already reaching for his coat and the dusty coil of rope he kept in the back, just in case. Rain hammered Ethan's windshield so hard it looked like the glass might buckle. The wipers slapped uselessly as he steered his old pickup toward Maple Creek. Water sheeted across the road, shimmering under swirling emergency lights ahead. He pulled onto the shoulder behind a cluster of sheriff cruisers, and rescue trucks grabbed his rope and stepped out into wind that tried to shove him backward. A deputy spotted him immediately. "Hey, sir, this is an active scene. Back in your vehicle." "I'm just here to help," Ethan said, lifting the rope slightly. The deputy's expression tightened. "We don't need civilians complicating things." Ethan swallowed. He'd lived versions of that line for years, ever since he turned in his badge and rescue patch. He'd heard it at job interviews, at community meetings, even once at a minor traffic accident, where he'd offered basic first aid. People always assumed the quiet guy in the gas station polo didn't know what he was doing. Across the flashing lights, a man in a reflective vest barked orders. "Flood units 10 minutes out. Nobody goes in the water till they get eyes on the culvert." Several responders nodded relief, washing over their faces. Waiting felt safer. But they weren't looking at the water the way Ethan was. His eyes tracked the churning current, the tree limbs spinning in circles, the way the minivan kept jerking harder each time the flood slapped it sideways. He could see the incline of the embankment funneling the runoff straight toward it. 10 minutes was an eternity. A uniformed sergeant jogged over, soaked to the bone. "You the guy from the truck stop?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "You need to step back behind the line, all right? Let the trained personnel handle it." Ethan almost laughed, a hollow, tired sound he barely kept behind his teeth. Trained personnel. He had once been exactly that. He had once been the person these guys deferred to in a storm. Now he was just the night clerk who brewed coffee at 2 a.m. "I used to be Coast Guard," he said. "Rescue swimmer." The sergeant paused, not long, just a blink, but his gaze flicked over Ethan's polo, his mud-stained jeans, his work boots. "Used to be," he repeated. "Right now you're out of jurisdiction and out of uniform." "It doesn't change that there's a kid in that car," Ethan said quietly. The sergeant sighed and motioned toward the roar under the bridge. "Look at that water. You go in, you're done. You'd put my team in danger trying to haul you out. Don't make this harder." Behind him, a few younger responders snickered under their breath, the kind of jittery laugh people make when fear gets too close. One murmured to another, "Every storm brings out a hero wannabe." Ethan's jaw flexed. He kept his eyes on the minivan, bobbing like a toy boat against the guardrail. The driver's window was underwater now. The boy's face was barely visible, a pale blur behind fogged glass. Then he heard his name. Dad. He whipped around. Lily's mom's SUV was skidding to a stop near the cruisers. His ex-wife Rachel jumped out first, rain whipping her hair sideways, followed by Lily wearing pajama pants and a raincoat 2 sizes too big. "You weren't answering your phone," Rachel yelled over the wind. "I told you not to chase storms." "You promised Ethan." A few deputies turned to look. A couple of them smirked, seeing the scene play out. A man with a rope suddenly scolded like a reckless teenager. Lily ran toward him, slipping on the wet grass before he caught her. "Dad, what are you doing? Are you going in the water?" Her voice shook, her small fingers pressing into his sleeve. He crouched down, brushing wet hair from her forehead. "I'm just checking things out, okay? That's all." "You're lying," she whispered. Her lower lip trembled. "I know when you're lying." Rachel stormed toward them. "This is exactly why I fought you on weekend overnights after storms. You get this look, you get drawn back in, you can't leave it alone." "I'm not trying to be reckless," Ethan said. "There's a kid stuck out there, and there are rescue crews on the way. Real ones. Stop pretending you're still—" He stood abruptly. "Don't finish that." But she did. "Still the guy you used to be." The words hit harder than the rain. Lily's hand tightened around his. "Please don't go in, Dad. Please." Her voice cracked in a way that carved straight through him. Ethan felt something break open inside. Not the sharp, clean snap of anger, but the heavy ache of old guilt resurfacing. Lily's face blurred with the memory of that night in the Atlantic. The man who slipped away from him the way Command reviewed the footage frame by frame, then told him he'd done everything right. But it hadn't felt right. He gently let go of Lily's hand. "Sweetheart, I'm not trying to scare you. I just can't stand here and watch that boy drown. He's not your responsibility," Rachel cried. "You can't save everyone." He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the minivan, now bouncing violently as the water rose. A piece of the guardrail groaned under pressure. Another hard wave might rip it free. A pair of state troopers splashed past them, shouting to reinforce the upstream barrier. One paused when he recognized Ethan. "Miles, you still working at that travel plaza?" Ethan nodded once. "Then stay on the shoulder," the trooper said, already turning away. "We can't be babysitting civilians." Civilians. Babysitting. Ethan inhaled through his teeth and kept his gaze on the van, forcing the insults down. They didn't matter, not compared to that boy's small, terrified hand. A loud metallic pop cracked through the storm. The guardrail bent inward a few inches, a warning shot from the river. The responders stiffened. The sergeant cursed, everyone back. "That rail's gonna give." A fresh wave slammed into the minivan, spinning its rear end deeper into the current. The headlights flickered, then died. Inside the boy's face vanished completely. Something in Ethan's chest snapped, not frustration, not anger, but the last thread of restraint. Waiting wasn't rescue. Waiting had cost him a life once. Waiting was a luxury that Kid didn't have. He stepped forward. The sergeant spotted him immediately. "Miles." "Don't even think about." Ethan kept walking, rope slung over his shoulder boots, splashing through water, pooling across the shoulder. A couple of responders moved to block him, but he sidestepped them without a word. Lily screamed behind him. "Dad, stop." He forced himself not to turn around. If he saw her face, he might falter. And if he faltered, that boy would die. A deputy lunged to grab his arm. Ethan slipped free, voice low and even. "Get out of my way. You're not trained for this," the deputy shouted. Ethan didn't stop moving. "You have no idea what I'm trained for." The sergeant cursed loudly. "Let him go. If he wants to drown, that's on him." That one stung not because of the insult, but because the man said it loud enough for Lily to hear. Ethan risked a glance back. She stood in the rain, arms wrapped around herself, sobbing, as Rachel tried to pull her close. Lily shook her head violently, refusing comfort, eyes locked on her father like she was watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. He mouthed the words, "I love you." She mouthed back, "Please come back." Her fear wrapped around his ribs like a vice. He could feel it pulsing with every heartbeat. But the minivan jerked again, and the rail shrieked under pressure, bending inward another inch. The boy was running out of time. Ethan clipped the rope to the guardrail post, not the damaged one, and looped it around his chest. A few responders yelled warnings he didn't hear. The storm roared too loudly, and his pulse was a drumbeat in his ears. He climbed over the railing and positioned himself on the narrow concrete lip above the water. Rain blurred everything. The swollen creek surged like a living, angry thing below. The sergeant shouted from the road, "You take one step in that water and you're dead." Ethan tightened the knot, testing its hold. His breath came slow and steady, his body remembering movements he thought he'd left behind years ago. Lily's sobs echoed faintly behind him, each one a knife. He whispered, "I'll come back." Then, as another massive wave slammed against the van, tearing open part of the passenger door, Ethan felt the moment crystallize around him. Every insult, every doubt, every internal war he'd waged since the night he failed that fisherman. This was the breaking point. Not of fear, of hesitation. He braced his feet on the slick concrete, looked once more at the submerged headlights, and prepared to step off into the flood. Behind him, someone yelled, "Miles, don't!" But the river roared louder. The boy had seconds left, and Ethan was done waiting. Water surged around the concrete lip as Ethan leaned forward, the flood frothing only a few feet below his boots. The rope around his chest tightened with every gust of wind, humming like a live wire against the guardrail post behind him. Lightning cracked overhead, exposing for a split second the full horror of the scene, the entire underpass swallowed by a churning mud-brown river with the minivan spinning violently against the last bend of the rail. The next wave slammed the vehicle so hard it bounced. A metal squeal ripped through the downpour, sharp enough to lift every responder's head. The guardrail bowed inward another 6 inches, trembling like a bone ready to snap. Someone shouted behind him, "We're losing the rail." Ethan didn't look back. He couldn't. Looking back meant seeing Lily again, and if he saw her eyes, saw her fear, he'd hesitate. And hesitation was the difference between rescue and recovery. He breathed once deep and controlled the way he used to before dropping from a helicopter into the North Atlantic. His fingers curled around the rope knuckles, white but steady. A final crack tore through the night. The guardrail gave. The minivan lurched forward, the river snatching it like prey. It spun tilted, then slammed into the concrete pillar supporting the bridge. The rear end sank. The roof disappeared under the swirl of mud. All that remained above water was the rear passenger window and the boy's hand, small and desperate, slapping weakly against the glass. Ethan jumped. Cold hit him like a punch, swallowing him whole. The force of the current dragged him sideways, snapping his body downstream until the rope jerked taut and yanked him to a stop so violently he felt the breath punch out of him. For a few seconds, the only world was water, deafening, freezing, absolute chaos. He kicked hard, angling toward the van, fighting the current that wanted to pull him toward the deepest run under the bridge. His lungs burned. His fingers felt numb instantly. But his mind was locked in right back in the old rhythm assess. Angle. Advance. Secure. A wave lifted him high enough to see the minivan again, nose down water rushing through the broken passenger door, the back window half submerged. The boy's scream didn't carry through the storm, but Ethan saw his mouth open in a silent cry. He swam harder. Behind him, responders scrambled along the shoulder, yelling coordinates, trying to track him with flashlights that flickered in the sideways rain. The sergeant barked orders, but no one moved into the water they couldn't. Protocol wouldn't allow it. Their gear wasn't rated for floods this severe. They weren't trained for a rescue without backup. But Ethan was. Another wave slammed into him, pulling him under. Darkness swallowed everything. The pressure of the water crushed his ears, punched into his chest, tried to steal his sense of direction. He forced his body upward, breaking the surface in a violent cough. "Get to the pillar," someone screamed from the bridge above. He didn't respond. He didn't waste breath. He reached the van's rear bumper just as the left side dipped deeper. He grabbed the handle, but it slipped from his hands, slick with algae, slick with mud, slick with the panic of a vehicle fighting to sink. He repositioned, bracing his legs against the pillar, using the force of the current instead of resisting it. The rope dug into his ribs hard enough to make him gasp. Inside the boy's face was a pale blur behind fogged glass. "Come on," Ethan muttered, grabbing his small emergency tool, a thick steel punch he kept on his keyring from old habits he never broke. He swung. Crack! The first hit spiderwebbed the glass. Crack! The second fractured it cleanly. A third blow shattered it inward. Water exploded into the cabin, surging around the boy's head. He shrieked, hands flying to his face. Ethan shoved his arm through the jagged opening, ignoring the sharp edges slicing into his sleeve. "I've got you," he rasped, fingers searching. "Give me your arm." The boy hesitated, terrified, clinging to the headrest. A memory punched through Ethan's mind. Another hand reaching for him years ago, slick with seawater, slipping free. The image seared him, lighting something fierce and unbreakable inside. "Take my hand," he roared louder than he meant to. Now, the boy obeyed. Ethan grabbed his wrist, small, trembling, ice cold. He pulled hard, but the current inside the cabin fought back, dragging the boy toward the sinking front end. Ethan braced his boots against the pillar, roaring through clenched teeth as he hauled the child upward inch by inch until the boy's shoulders cleared the window frame. A wave hit them sideways. The van lurched deeper. Ethan lost his grip for a split second. "No," he yelled, catching the boy's sleeve just as he slid. The rope around Ethan's chest tightened violently as the current swung him perpendicular to the car. He ignored the pain, shoved his entire forearm into the window, looped the boy's arm over his shoulder like a makeshift harness, and pulled again. The boy came free. Ethan wrapped him against his chest, locking one arm around him and gripping the rope with the other. The current slammed them both into the pillar. Pain shot through Ethan's arm, but he held on. "Hold on to me," he gasped. The boy clung to him, shaking uncontrollably. Overhead responders scrambled onto the bridge railing, lowering a second rope. Flashlights illuminated the scene in jittery strobes Ethan pinned against the concrete. The boy's head barely above water, the minivan disappearing under the flood behind them. Lily's scream cut through the storm. "Dad." He risked a glance. She was on the shoulder near Rachel, hands cupped around her mouth, sobbing harder than he'd ever seen. Her voice cracked, raw, and terrified. "Daddy, please." The sound anchored him, more powerful than the rope, more powerful than the training. He pressed his cheek against the boy's head. "You're okay," he whispered, breath shaking. "I've got you." His muscles trembled violently, every inch of him burning from cold and strain. His ribs felt like they'd crack under the pressure of the rope. But he inched his way along the pillar, using the concrete ridges for grip. The current refused to let go, slamming into his legs, dragging him sideways. A rescuer on the bridge yelled, "Miles, get your arm through the loop. We'll haul you the rest." Ethan dug deeper than he thought he could, fighting each inch toward the hanging rope. His fingers brushed it once, slipped, then found it again. He wrapped it around his wrist, then shoved the boy's weight toward the rescuers waiting on the bank. Hands reached down, grabbing the child under the arms. "We've got him! We've got him!" The moment they lifted the boy free, Ethan's arm gave out. The current swung him backward into the pillar, head snapping against the edge. White sparks exploded in his vision. His own rope line groaned the post, straining under the force. Someone upstairs screamed, "The anchor's failing." A fresh surge of water ripped through the underpass, the strongest yet. It tore the sinking van free, dragging it downstream with a roar that shook the bridge. Ethan's rope jerked violently. The world tilted sideways. The line dug deeper into his ribs, cutting off air vision, swimming dark at the edges. Then hands, arms reached from above, rough and desperate, grabbing under his shoulders. "Pull," someone shouted. "Haul him up. Don't let him go. Don't you dare let him go." Ethan felt his body lift slowly, painfully scraped against concrete, until the rope loosened enough for him to breathe. A final heave yanked him over the barrier. He collapsed onto the wet pavement, coughing so hard it doubled him over. Rain pounded his face. His entire body shook from cold and adrenaline. He tasted blood. He barely registered the stream of boots around him, the voices shouting orders. But he heard one voice, shaking, breaking. "Dad. Dad." Lily. He rolled onto his side as she threw herself into his arms, sobbing into his soaked shirt. He held her tight with what little strength he had left, pressing his cheek against the top of her head. Rachel knelt beside them, crying too, one hand over her mouth. The sergeant approached, breathing hard, rain dripping from his hat brim. His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by something grim and shaken. "Miles, we saw the whole thing." His voice cracked slightly. "You saved that boy. No question." But Ethan barely heard him. He looked past the sergeant to the boy wrapped in a rescue blanket sitting on the tailgate of an ambulance. A paramedic checked his vitals, while the child stared at Ethan with wide, dazed eyes. The boy whispered something to the medic. The medic nodded toward Ethan. "He wants to say thank you." The sergeant swallowed. "Miles, you didn't just jump into floodwater. You kept that kid alive. You held him up even when the rope was cutting into you." Another responder stepped forward. "You weren't just helping. You were leading out there." A third shook his head in disbelief. "Hell, we were taking cues from you." Ethan felt the rain cooling on his skin, turning the world hazy and unreal. He'd jumped before thinking. He'd moved on instinct, on memory, on guilt, on something older and deeper than both. But looking at Lily's trembling hands and the boy's small, blanket-wrapped frame, he realized it wasn't guilt that drove him. Not anymore. It was a promise, one he hadn't said out loud since he left the Coast Guard. If someone was drowning in front of him, he wouldn't let go. Not ever again. Responders backed away, giving him space. Power shifted quietly, unmistakably. People who'd dismissed him an hour ago now looked at him with stunned, humbled eyes. And on the wet asphalt with his daughter clinging to him, and the sirens fading behind them, Ethan Miles finally felt something break loose inside his chest. Not fear, not guilt. Something lighter. Something like air rising. The rain eased only slightly, thinning from a punishing downpour to a steady, cold sheet. Sirens still echoed against the bridge, but the chaos had shifted, less frantic, more stunned. Ethan sat on the pavement with Lily curled against him, her small body shaking with leftover fear. His own hands trembled, though he wasn't sure if it was from the water or the adrenaline still clawing through him. Rescue crews moved around them, quieter now, almost reverent. The boy he'd pulled from the minivan sat wrapped in a silver thermal blanket on the ambulance bumper. His eyes never left Ethan, the look of someone who'd glimpsed the edge of something dark and been pulled back into the world by a stranger's hand. A paramedic approached Ethan with a stethoscope and a worried frown. "Sir, we need to check you for hypothermia and chest bruising. That rope did a number on you." Ethan nodded slightly, but didn't lift his arm from around Lily. She held on to him like she was afraid he'd fade like mist in the rain. Rachel wiped her eyes and stood nearby, watching him with a look that wasn't anger anymore, just a shaken sort of bewilderment, like she was seeing a man she thought she knew from a completely different angle. Behind her, the sergeant and two troopers whispered to each other, casting glances at Ethan. None of the mocking smirks remained, none of the dismissive looks. Their posture had changed, shoulders squared, nodding subtly when their eyes met his. Respect. Maybe even a little awe. The sergeant approached, hat under his arm, face pale under the bridge lights. "Miles, you want to walk me through how you just did that?" His voice wasn't accusatory now. It was unsteady, almost humbled. Ethan let out a tired breath. I saw a kid drowning, he said quietly, and waiting wasn't an option. You swam in a flood channel, the sergeant said, shaking his head. Most trained responders can't do that without a team backing them up. I had a rope, Ethan replied. That rope was 1 second from snapping, the sergeant said. And even with the rope, you maneuvered like you'd done this 100 times. Ethan looked down, rain dripping from his hair. Lily shifted closer, listening. One of the younger deputies stepped up, voice softer than Ethan remembered from earlier. Sir, you moved like like someone who's trained for this. Really trained. Rachel lifted her head, eyes narrowing. Tell them, she whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't want to dig those memories up, not here, not this night, not with Lily watching every expression on his face. But the silence kept stretching, and the responders kept waiting. It was Lily who finally broke it. Dad used to save people from the ocean, she said, wiping her nose with her sleeve. He was in the Coast Guard. The sergeant's eyebrows shot up. The deputies stilled. Even the paramedics paused mid-motion. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. So much for keeping it buried. You were Coast Guard, the sergeant asked, voice rising. What unit rescue swimmer? Ethan said softly. 10 years. A flurry of reactions rippled through the group, swearing, startled laughter, muttered apologies. The sergeant looked like someone had just handed him the last piece of a puzzle that suddenly made every blurred image clear. No wonder, the deputy said under his breath. No wonder you went in like that. But the sergeant wasn't finished. His eyes searched Ethan's face. Why didn't you tell us that earlier? Ethan looked at the water, the place where the minivan had disappeared. Because it doesn't change the risk, he said, and because it's not who I am anymore. Rachel knelt beside him, rain dripping off her chin. That's not true, she said. It's always been who you are. You just stopped believing it. He didn't respond. Couldn't. The weight of her words pressed too closely against memories he'd locked down for years. Behind them, the boy's mother arrived in a frantic, staggering run, barefoot, hair-soaked hands, shaking uncontrollably. She collided with the paramedic, then spotted her son sitting on the ambulance bumper. Her scream broke open the night. She rushed to him, sweeping him up in her arms, crying into his neck. The boy clung to her, whispering, "The water took the car. He saved me. He saved me." She turned toward Ethan. Her face twisted, grief, fear, relief, gratitude so intense it bordered on disbelief. She walked to him slowly, like approaching a miracle she didn't know she deserved. Are you the man who... She couldn't finish. She covered her mouth, tears streaming. Ethan tried to stand, but his legs buckled. The sergeant caught him under the arm. The boy's mother dropped to her knees in front of him, hands trembling as she reached out. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing my baby back. I don't even have words. I don't even know your name." "Ethan," he said hoarsely. She sobbed harder. "Ethan, I owe you my entire world." Her reaction washed over the responders like a second wave. Heads bowed. A few wiped at their own eyes. Not one person doubted anymore that what they'd witnessed was something extraordinary. Then the trooper captain arrived, a stern, silver-haired woman with a face that didn't show much emotion except frustration on a normal night. She surveyed the scene, then fixed her gaze on Ethan. "You're the one who went in." Ethan tensed, expecting reprimand, a lecture about protocol. Instead, she said, "Good God, son. That was one hell of a rescue." He blinked. "Ma'am, no. Listen." Her voice softened. "Half my team froze when that guardrail snapped. And for good reason. That kind of water kills trained responders. But you went anyway. You kept your head. You improvised. You saved that boy's life." He didn't know what to say. Praise felt wrong in his mouth, like trying to swallow something too heavy. But she wasn't finished. "We could use people like you," she said. "If you ever want to come back to the field, if you ever want to be part of a rescue team again, we'd take you in a heartbeat. I'd write the recommendation myself." Rachel stiffened, slightly surprised. Lily looked up at him with wide eyes. "You belong out there," the captain said. "You've still got the instincts, and you've still got the heart." A hush fell across the responders around them. The sergeant who'd dismissed him only an hour earlier took off his hat fully this time, holding it against his chest. "Miles, we misjudged you," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry. I'm damn sorry." The younger deputy who'd mocked him earlier stepped forward, face flushed with shame. I shouldn't have said what I said. You're the real deal, sir." The power dynamic had shifted entirely. The men who once saw him as a liability now looked at him like he was carved from something steadier than stone. Lily leaned back to look at her father's face. Her eyes were still wet, but her voice had softened into something small and hopeful. "Dad, you always tell me bravery means being scared and doing it anyway." Her fingers curled into his sleeve. "So, does this mean you were brave tonight?" He swallowed hard. The truth rose in him like a tide he couldn't stop. "Yes," he whispered. "I think it does." Lily's shoulders sagged in relief. For the first time since arriving, she smiled. She tired, but real. The trooper captain clapped her hands once, catching everyone's attention. "All right, folks, let's wrap this scene and prep for the next flash flood alert. But Miles, before you go." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a card, pressing it into his hand. "You ever get tired of pumping gas and brewing coffee? Come see me. You've got a place on my team if you want it." Ethan stared at the card, the weight of it heavier than the soaked paper justified. An invitation. A door back into the world he'd abandoned. A chance to reclaim the part of himself he'd buried under years of guilt and quiet nights. Rachel watched him carefully, not discouraging, not pressuring, just trying to read his face. "You don't have to decide now," she said softly. "Just don't run from yourself anymore." The boy's mother embraced her son again, whispering prayers. The responders packed up equipment. The storm eased further, the worst of it moving east. The river still roared, but the edge of danger had shifted downstream. For a moment, everything felt suspended, like the breath before a new chapter begins. Ethan squeezed Lily's hand, the captain's card clutched between his fingers. In the swirling mist rising from the floodwater, he could see the shape of a choice. A return. A reckoning. A new beginning. And for the first time in years, the path ahead didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a calling. Morning broke gray and quiet over Maple Creek, the kind of washed-out dawn that comes after a night the whole town will talk about for years. By then, the flood crews were gone, the wreckage cleared, and the highway reopened to a slow line of traffic. But the people who'd stood on that bridge, the ones who watched a quiet, unassuming man step into a river no sane person would enter, weren't the same as they'd been the day before. Word spread fast. By sunrise, Ethan's name was already moving through first responder group chats, sheriff offices in 3 counties, and eventually the local news ticker. The boy's mother had told anyone who would listen that he wasn't just brave, he was the reason her son was sleeping in his own bed instead of lying in a morgue. Even the sergeant who'd dismissed him earlier showed up at Rachel's house that afternoon. He stood awkwardly on the porch, hat in hand, looking like a man who'd practiced an apology the whole drive over. "Your ex saved a life last night," he told Rachel. "We judged him wrong. I judged him wrong." Ethan, still sore and wrapped in an old sweatshirt, stepped outside before the man finished speaking. The sergeant swallowed and offered his hand, humble, sincere. "You taught my whole team something last night," he said. "About courage, about instincts, about stepping up when the book says stand down." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "We're better today because of what you did." It wasn't praise Ethan sought, but it settled somewhere deep, somewhere sore, that had never healed right. That afternoon, the trooper captain called. Not a voicemail, not a formality, a real conversation. She told him the offer wasn't a courtesy. It was a genuine opening. A position where his instincts and experience wouldn't be buried under mop buckets and coffee filters, where he could train rescue personnel statewide, build protocols, shape a system that respected the edge he'd learned to walk. "You don't have to decide now," she said. "But if you're ready to stop hiding from who you are, we're ready to have you." Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked over at Lily, sitting cross-legged on the couch, coloring a picture of a river with a tiny figure tied to a rope. She glanced up, smiled the kind of smile that made everything inside him unclench. "Dad," she whispered, "you'd be really good at helping people again." Something in those words flicked a light back on. A week later, he signed the papers. He didn't go back to the Coast Guard. He didn't want the ocean again. But he stepped into a new position with the State Emergency Response Division as a flood rescue instructor and safety coordinator. The job wasn't glamorous. It wasn't heroic on the surface. But it was the kind of work that ripple-changed futures, training people who might one day save a stranger or a neighbor or someone's child. And for the first time in a long while, he woke up feeling like he was moving toward something instead of running from something. 3 months passed, and spring rolled into Oklahoma like a warm breeze sweeping out the last shadows of winter. Ethan's life settled into a different rhythm: classes, field drills, early mornings, spent rewriting outdated safety manuals so the next responder wouldn't freeze when seconds mattered. His old quiet confidence returned, not loud or proud, just steady. And Lily changed, too. At school, she wrote an essay about the bravest person I know. She never showed it to him, but her teacher mailed him a copy. The first line made him sit down. "My dad isn't a hero because of a river. He's a hero because he never lets go." On weekends, she'd go with him to the training center and help set up cones or hand out water bottles. She walked taller. She talked stronger. And sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking, she'd trace the new department logo on his jacket with her fingertips, as if memorizing that this was her dad, now the one she'd always believed he could be. Even Rachel softened. Their co-parenting, once edged with old frustrations and misunderstandings, shifted into something cooperative, respectful. The night she watched him teach a recruit class on swift water response, she lingered afterward. "You look steady," she said, "like you finally put something down you were carrying too long." "Maybe I did," he replied. The boy he saved visited once, shy and carrying a handmade thank you card. His mother hugged Ethan longer than he expected. She whispered, "You didn't just save him. You saved me." He didn't quite know how to hold those words, so he simply nodded and told the boy to listen to his mother and stay away from flood signs. By early summer, the state announced a new protocol for rural flash flood rescues, one that mirrored Ethan's recommendations, emphasizing immediate action when trained personnel were stuck waiting for clearance. The press release didn't mention his name, but everyone in the department knew where the changes had come from. On a warm June evening, Ethan stood on the training center's observation platform, watching a group of rookie responders practice rope-assisted water retrieval in the artificial channel. The air smelled of grass and distant barbecue smoke. The sky glowed orange. Lily sat cross-legged beside him, swinging her legs and sipping a grape soda. "You like this job better than the gas station?" she said matter-of-factly. He chuckled. A little. You don't look sad anymore, she added. You used to look sad and not tell me. Ethan swallowed. I didn't want you to worry. I'm glad you're not hiding it now. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Me too. A whistle blew down below. A trainee struggled with the current, fighting the rope at a bad angle. Ethan leaned forward, ready to shout guidance, but another recruit stepped in, corrected the angle, and brought the floundering rescuer to safety. Ethan smiled. Not pride. Something steadier. Fulfillment. Because this teaching others to be brave, helping them rise to the moment that was where he belonged now. Not in a helicopter over cold Atlantic water. Not shelving gum and cigarettes under fluorescent lights. But here, with purpose. Lily nudged him. Dad. Yeah, Bug. Are you brave every day now? He thought for a long moment. The kind of moment that settles deep in the bones. No, he said honestly. But I try. She nodded, satisfied, and leaned her head on his shoulder. The sun dipped lower, painting the training pool gold. The recruits kept practicing voices carrying across the water. Cars hummed on the nearby highway. Life steady and simple moved forward. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, Ethan understood something he'd never let himself believe before. Sometimes the hardest rescues aren't the ones in the water. Sometimes they're the ones inside yourself. And courage, real courage, isn't about being fearless. It's about showing up anyway, even when the current is strong.